Okay, thanks, Caitlin. Can you give the others a bit of a hurry up for us when you're ready? Okay, I'll call the meeting to order. The others will be here in a minute. So welcome to all. Welcome to everybody online. This is a workshop to discuss low pressure sewer policy, and I guess because you're sitting at the table, Brent, you will lead this off. Okay, so
thank you. We're good to go.
Good to go.
Right. Things you didn't know but are about to find out. Low pressure sewer. So if we go step through the slideshow, pretty much outlines where we're headed and why we're getting there. The problem we have, and it's pretty well known, is our wastewater network is exceeding its capacity and overflowing during medium rainfall events. Most of that's caused by stormwater finding its way into our wastewater network. The encouraging thing is our wastewater system actually has extra capacity. In fine weather, we're running at about 60%. So we know stormwater is the major contributor. So as you also know, there's quite a considerable amount of work going on to remove as much cross-connected stormwater as we can. But that's a very much a work in progress. In the meantime, what's happening is we're getting more infill in Westport. We're getting more applications and people wanting to, the housing density in Westport is growing. And in those medium rainfall events, because we're struggling with the capacity at the wastewater treatment plant, having some way of detaining as much volume into those into that system will be advantageous. So we've got two options. We can either restrict development, which I don't think anyone really wants, or managing or reducing our wastewater volumes. Okay, so when we say wastewater volumes, we're talking that combined wastewater stormwater. Next slide, please. So will the low pressure sewer system be part of the solution? We think it will. Detention will be typically for 2 or 3 days. Now, obviously we get rainfall events that last more than 2 or 3 days, but it will hold back from properties 2 to 3 days worth of wastewater and stormwater. The management of the system allows us to say, well, we know there's a high likelihood of heavy rainfall. We trigger the pumps to empty those detention tanks. So when it's raining for the next 2 or 3 days, that volume is not going to the network, it's being held on the property. So what is a wastewater system, low pressure sewer system? It's basically that. All your wastewater basically flows into a detention tank that's got a pressurized pump and macerator on it. It's controlled by Wi-Fi. BDC can see the status of it, how full it is, whether everything's working optimally, and then it pumps into our system. The important thing to note on that is the property boundary, because that's basically where we're headed to very shortly. And that's important. The next one, please. Okay, well, so when would we ask for what would require an LPS system to be installed? That's in an area of town where we're under pressure. We've got undersized pipes, or we know that volume's going to an outfall that typically overflows repeatedly. If it's significant, we've had 2 developments recently, one down Queen Street, one at Palmerston Street, the new Kangaroo development. So they are intense housing developments. We can do, and we have detention installed there. And how much would it cost the owner? The complete system's around 17,500 plus GST. Annual power cost is actually it's minimal, $50 to $60 a year. Pumps and controllers, estimates are they're good for up to 10 years. possibly beyond. And annual inspection and maintenance may be around that 150 mark. Next slide, please. So ownership, this is where the boundary really comes into play. So, and this is really where we're providing you this information, and because we're going to need a steer as to how we develop this policy. So the ownership and the ongoing maintenance and operating costs need to be determined. As we said, we're only going to require it in areas where wastewater network can't cope with the wastewater volumes in those medium rainfall events. And the ownership, we're only dealing with the assets, the pumps, the tanks, pipes and controllers located inside the property boundary. So assets are enduring, which means we need these things to be operating not for the next 10 years, but possibly the next 20. Eventually that capacity issue will hopefully be resolved, but it's not going to happen anytime soon. So there's a couple of ownership options that we'll present, but basically it needs an internet connection and it needs power to operate that. Now the cost of BDC providing a separate power line to a system inside a property boundary, just the network connection charges would be horrific. So every council in New Zealand basically requires the property owner to pay for that electricity. We will, so those are requirements on the property owner, that they will pay for the electricity internet connection and to pay for and install the equipment, which would be specified by council. Yes, Councillor.
Can I just ask a question? Like, you've got only required for developments in areas where wastewater network cannot cope.
Mm-hmm.
So are we saying multi-residential developments, or is this something that
generally, because there's very few undeveloped sections in Westport that would be a new connection. So most properties in Westport are already connected to the wastewater net system, but they may be looking at putting a second dwelling on that property.
Okay.
And
so it's only for new development.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's in those 1s and 2s won't have massive impact, but if suddenly and it could happen, we've got 50 or 100 houses in a 1 square kilometre block feeding one pump station, that's a significant increase in capacity.
So it's not going to be retrospectively applied
No.
to existing roads, like for instance,
So you press your button there.
so, yeah, so it's not going to be retrospectively applied to existing dwellings, especially high volume ones like motels, for example.
No, there's no intention to require it.
I think just to clarify on that, as we upgrade sewer systems, there could be situations where a low pressure system would be appropriate to do, but the implications because that homeowner would currently be paying a targeted rate for wastewater, so that way we would have to charge for that would be different to a new subdivision or a new development. So if we went along and said, right, this system here is undersized, it's causing problems, and a low pressure sewer system would alleviate that would be funded as part of that project as opposed to a development cost. However, if a motelier, for example, wanted to build another set of motels or double the height, then a low pressure sewer system would be likely be an appropriate solution for that.
Sorry, Colin.
Mr. Mayor. But look, stand by this, I'll be honest. Last year, we went for the long-term plan, we went at the public consultation about stormwater separation. We're now being told that stormwater, when we have the big rain events and what have you, have an issue on the wastewater plant. That's fine, but we've gone out there and we've said, okay, we're going to go and do the separation, but we're told it's going to take a number of years. So in the meantime, what we're going to do is get people to invest. We're going to make people invest $17,000 for this equipment. Now, we have always had financial and development contributions. So the infill that we're talking about, and I drove past one just the other day, one house initially, now there's 4 down there. The old just over quarter acre section, there's 4. Now, my understanding was that those extra 3 houses are putting on additional pressure on the existing infrastructure. And yet, it appears to me that we do not ask the developer to ping the new owners for the pressure that they're putting onto the existing infrastructure, whatever that might be. But wastewater is what we're talking about at the moment. So I cannot understand why, as I say, going back to what I said before, we had this public consultation last year, and we've agreed that we will do the separation. Now we're talking about something else on new developments which will not be necessary, supposedly, after we get the stormwater separation sorted out. Now, what's coming first? What's coming first, the cart or the horse or whatever? This is all part of what I used to call planning. And we should have known about this time last year when we went out for consultation.
Right.
Please correct me.
Yep, there's a few things to unpack there. So the first one is development contributions don't occur on a single section you can have up to, I think, three houses infilled on a section. If that section remains a single title, I've got a section in Westport, I've got a house on it, I can put 2 more on there. I don't need to apply beyond building consent. It's only triggered, development contributions would only be triggered when that section was divided up into 3 separate sections or 3 different titles. Each would then, that subdivision application would trigger a development contribution. Yes, the stormwater separation is a long piece of work. I mean, it's going to take the best part of 10 years to get to where we need to be, because we can't, it's not affordable to go out to the community and throw, 5 or 6 million at resolving that. It's a challenge just about every council in New Zealand faces. But we need to get there, and we will get there. We just can't do it quickly. I guess the real driver for this is we can't continue putting more volume into the wastewater network, because we just will have more and more breaches of our consent conditions. So this is a way of signalling to developers that infill will be possible, but it will come at a cost.
If I can just sort of add to that, there's a slight conflation of issues as well. So the stormwater separation project is effectively, we have a consent that has expired and needs to be renewed. Part of that renewal is an acknowledgement that we were constantly breaching that consent, like 5 or 6 times more overflows per year. So the system, when it's dry, the wastewater system is running, I think, about 60% capacity. When it rains, it gets up, but not all of that water gets to the wastewater treatment plant because it overflows, because the pumps around the area here are not designed to cope with that flow, and therefore they overflow. So this is stormwater getting into the wastewater that does not get to the wastewater treatment plant and mixes with wastewater and flows into our rivers, which is unacceptable at the rate we're doing it. So we're renewing our consent. Part of that consent requires us to separate. So you can't conflate that aspect of it with what we're looking at here. When we get to a point that we have done all the separations possible, it's not going to stop all stormwater getting in, because it will still get in, because that happens in every system, but the majority of it's gone. Then that gives us that 60% capacity of the wastewater treatment plant. The remaining 40% capacity is a certain length of time. If we use tools like low pressure sewer systems and have detention on people's property, especially in new developments, that remaining 40%, the life of that 40% increases quite significantly. So if it was, say, another 20 years of life, we could extend that to 30 or 40 years of life before we have to spend $100 million upgrading the wastewater treatment plant. So this gives the ability to grow, the ability to put in new subdivisions, the ability to put in one-off units on properties and not overflow the system. Even if we had a development contribution, and Brent's right in terms of those small additional infills, we don't, even if we did, the cost to upgrade the current system to cope is bigger pipes everywhere, which is massively expensive. If we do it using a low pressure sewer system where we can pump into the existing pipes when they're not full, then that saves us having to upgrade the existing infrastructure. For the new development, yes, there's a cost on site for each one, but if a new developer's putting something in and everything works by gravity where it can, the downhill pipes become bigger and bigger and bigger because it has to cope with the peak flow. We can curb that peak flow so the pipes are smaller, so the cost of the developer is smaller, the cost of council when that's vested to us in terms of maintenance is smaller. So there are ongoing benefits to that. So yes, we're doing wastewater, stormwater separation because we have to, but we also need to look at the other growth that we want to do and being able to extend the assets that we've got and the life of those assets for as long as possible and get the best value out of it. And I think that's sort of the crux of this. The bulk of the benefit is when we look at new developments and how they will serve, how they will be served by our infrastructure. But there is also benefit in terms of the one-off infills, but also other things when we need to do upgrades as to whether or not we can do this or not. So it's really important for council to understand the different aspects of this as well as the overall benefit of it. There are some one-off costs, and those costs are less than if you put your own on-site sewer treatment system in. So there are benefits to doing that as well.
Phil?
Yeah, thanks for the explanation. So for complete clarity for me, only required for developments in areas where the wastewater network cannot cope with wastewater volumes in medium and rain. So there's two things happening as you've identified, Anthony. New developments could intentionally use this type of approach to lower the costs of networking. So that's one thing. But alternatively, we must know of some areas that currently cannot cope. So if there was some development happening there, the recommendation would be for the slope. So my question then is, if we know that, can we have those areas identified to us? So we've got a pretty fair idea of where in our, these installations would be a requirement for further development. Can you provide that information to us?
Yeah, I can get a model for you of those, but I won't speculate, but there are a number of pump stations in Westport that overflow regularly, more than others. Yeah. Probably too, the other biggest constraint we do have is the pipes under the Bullock Bridge that actually convey that through. So it's not a matter of just getting bigger pumps because we're constrained by that capacity under the bridge.
Thanks, Phil. Dave?
Yeah, just hearing this, I understand the logic behind it, makes perfect sense. But there's a confluence of factors that go on that I think are going to disincentivize developers developing in the 7825 postcode. That's the insurance retreat and the requirements to build up a certain height, and now this pressure thing. So as long as we're aware of that we are actually disincentivizing people to develop in the 7825 postcode, new developments, and we are therefore driving them towards outside of that postcode for building developments and ongoing sort of housing areas, suburbs, whatever. I mean, is that
Is that a fair observation? And was that a deliberate, or is that something we need to consider going forward with our town planning, as Colin alluded to?
It's not a, there's no Machiavellian plans in there from infrastructure saying we don't want development inside Westport. It's just how do we allow that? And certainly the reason for this policy, which is part of what we get into as well, is why are we doing this now? We've got local water done well coming up in 18 months' time. This responsibility for this engineering standards, etc., will transfer to those people. That the issue we have at the moment is there are requests coming in for infill. And so we've got planning basically saying, can your systems cope with this development? And we're saying, yes, you'd need to put it in detention. How much is that going to cost? So you've got people basically saying, I want to drop a tank flat on my section and plumb it into the network. They've got an architect to write the plans. They've gone through a resource consent or a building consent application. And because we don't have this policy, they're unaware that this could be a cost. So this is basically signaling again to our community, you could do your development and it may not be affected by this policy, but you probably want to check that out first before you get so far down the path that you then become angry because I paid for my plans, I've submitted my fees, and now I'm being told.
Yeah, sorry. And the other confluence of factors are, as you alluded to, now you can get a granny flat without needing a building permit.
You can if it's not connected to services. So the minute they want to put another dwelling on and connect it to water or wastewater, yes, you are then required to have a permit.
Thanks, Brent, Dave, Shane.
Just on that note, Dave, I think there are costs, there are costs. If we're looking at Reefton now with development in Reefton, we know that we have stormwater issues, So if you are building out of town, you have a requirement to put in water tanks and firefighting. And so there are costs to building outside of town as well. So I think this is, whether it deters people or not, it's the reality of us actually going forward with the right things in place, because when local water done well comes in, all of these things are going to be looked at. We're not going to be able to keep going on as we have in the past and overload systems. It's just, that's part of what's happening. So I hear what you're saying, but I actually think that, it is the reality of now of development and keeping our system sustainable. And if you were building outside of this area, you'll have additional costs anyway. So I kind of hear. But Brent, can you just clarify actually around the granny flat thing? Because I thought that you didn't need, like with the new law that's come in, I thought you didn't need any, with the granny flats. Do you you don't need building consents, but you need permits?
I will get that confirmed. From my understanding is up to 50 square metres.
Yeah.
Unconnected to anything other than electricity, you don't need a building consent. But the second you attach it to services, that's water, wastewater, you do.
I can confirm that, yeah, it's, if you are connecting to the service, then that gets looked under the building codes and act, and that's when that triggers, and that's why the review and the application is needed, because the respective codes has to be accessed against if that particular building is complying to or not. And also one thing to add while I'm speaking is, I think it's not the first time we're trying to introduce the low pressure into the district. There are already an area, even a couple of years ago, in Cape Fowl Wind and some in the Westport that we have particularly look at case by case basis. And so people are coming and already adapting to this. And one of the purpose of this workshop and to get the guidances on to standardize this whole process through the development engineering, that we have one set of answers that we give out to the developer or people or anyone, and it's worth we're trying to get to this mode here.
Thanks. Back to you, Brent.
Yeah, I think we can slide forward. So basically we're looking at basically two ownership options. Ownership, and this is for all the equipment inside that boundary. So privately built, privately paid operating costs, but council inherits ownership of the system. So they build it and then they gift it to council. So the advantage are that allows that infill development to continue, and we can ensure that the systems are maintained, upgraded, and they're operating to our satisfaction. The downsides, we would be responsible for all ongoing costs. Now, how do we recover those? Do you apportion those costs across unit rates, or do we go to a target rate? We would require easements or rely on public works orders to enter private property to undertake maintenance. I mean, when a development occurs and that person that puts that dwelling on there, they'll be happy for anything to happen, but they sell it in 5 years' time, and suddenly you've got someone who says, actually, I don't want BBC on my property. I'm not allowing you to come in for inspection. So we need those easements, or we have to use the heavy stick of the Public Works Act. And as I said, we may require another targeted rate. So someone who has a low pressure sewer, if we're going to maintain, do the inspections, do the upgrades as and when they're required, then we're going to have to recover that cost somehow. Option 2 is they build it, they install it, they pay the operating and maintenance costs, and they maintain it. The advantage for us is that the development continues, minimal costs to council. We're only responsible for the network connection to the boundary, as we are now with any other system. The disadvantage is we're going to rely on that, having a compliant or responsible property owner. However, I'd argue when you push that button on your toilet, you want the thing to flush. So if it's not operating, there's a big incentive for them to maintain it. It could present challenges to respond to technology changes if we need to change the control systems. However, at the moment, there's only one real player in this low pressure system in New Zealand. And those changes may come through, but we can operate two kinds of systems if need be.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Quick question about that. How would you be able to monitor, just say under this option 2, would you be able to monitor if the system is working as designed? For instance, if it continued to pump out under those situations where you don't want it to, would you know that that's happening? Could you monitor that?
Yes.
Under model 2?
Yes. So that they're all connected to the internet. There are level sensors in the wells, etc., and the pump out chambers. So we would see those moving up and down.
More to the point, would you be actually monitoring under option 2? Who's going to monitor?
We'll be monitoring under both options. Electronic. Yeah. We monitor a lot of stuff.
So the obvious answer is just to have a shut-off valve that once the system is non-compliant, it just shuts down. And the only way to get it to re-comply is to bring it back up to operating standard, at which point it's reactivated.
Yeah, possible. Yep. Okay. So basically, they're the two ownership models the only two ownership models really. What have other councils done? Christchurch went into low pressure sewer really quickly after in fact, they're one of the proponents for it, and one of the basically the only supplier in New Zealand of low pressure sewer control systems. Is now, I think, part owned by Christchurch City Council. They actually helped develop this whole process. They went in basically boots and all because they had broken networks. They needed that detention, so they took the we'll own it. But I think you can see now that for commercial properties, they're now saying no. It's you install it, you operate it, you maintain it. So that's big housing developments, multi-unit developments, etc. Queenstown Lakes are new into this. Queenstown's probably in a similar situation to us in that their wastewater plant is at capacity, effectively. And so this is going, I think it's called Johnston council, the farm that's developed just on the way to Kingstown. So this is that they created their policy to allow that big subdivision to occur, and they've taken all assets inside the property boundary are yours. If you want your toilet to flush, you need to maintain your system. So why do we need that policy? As I said, we've been dealing with this stuff on a sort of case by case basis to allow those large developments, but particularly around this new rule on infill housing, anything under 70 square meters can be done without a consent. As I said, we need that clarity, not just for ourselves, but for the people who want to put that infill housing in, that we're clear and upfront. It can be done. Infill can be done. This may apply in certain situations, and I think having that map of what areas are likely to be affected is a great idea, and one we should follow up on. Yeah, and we're not saying this will apply to all infill housing everywhere. It's where we know it's going to have an impact. I think that's only next one is.
Excuse me, Brent, we've got a question from Dave.
Well, just quickly, before we move off that, I think that the two different options that you've set, the two different existing examples that you've used, Christchurch, I just quickly noted down, Christchurch was reactive to a problem that arose, so an earthquake that created a problem that they needed to cure on behalf of existing builds. Whereas Queenstown's more applicable to us in the situation that it's trying to enable an increase in the network capacity. So I just wanted to note that so that people are aware that the private option of Queenstown is applicable to a benefit build.
On that point, Dave, so yes, after the earthquakes, but what did it have to do with the Bromley situation as well?
No, the interesting thing with Christchurch is they're still using it. So those systems that were installed are still operating because it gives them a lot of flexibility in terms of managing their wastewater volumes, the time of day, etc. And it's will be useful for us as well. So when we gave the example of, we know it's going to rain heavily over the next 2 days, let's empty all those detention nets, push the button and get those things empty now ahead of it, get it through the system while its conditions are ideal, detain. As Anthony alluded to as well, when you've got 40% capacity and everything else is dealt with, being able to trigger those things, so detain through the daytime, 2 o'clock in the morning, flush it. That might be a little bit loud for some residential land. It might be 5 o'clock in the morning, everyone wakes up, the pumps are humming. But get that, it allows us to even that distribution of volume through the system as well. So yeah, the interesting thing with Christchurch is Bromley, I'm not completely au fait with I know it caught fire. I don't know that the detention was a reaction to that or caused any part of that, but it certainly, if you have to turn your wastewater plant off, those properties at least will still be able to flush the toilets.
Well, given the Bromley situation, one could actually make a case, I think, that it's risk mitigation by encouraging this sort of thing to be done for new developments on top of the capacities in your systems as well. Okay, thanks, Brent.
So yeah, these are just starters for 10 really, is not having a policy and option. Absolutely it is, but it just comes to that risk of people coming to council saying, I want to put a section, another building on my property, and then they find out actually there's something you hadn't factored in, that's a potential $17,000 bill for detention. Oh yeah, can or should council pay for systems or operating costs? Christchurch does a rebate. I said earlier, it's about $10 a month for internet and power consumption. So Christchurch does a rebate, does a rates rebate of $120 a year for anybody that has that system. Is that a showstopper or something we should consider?
When you say internet, you're really talking about cell network connection.
No, so it's because again, it's a bit like how paying for a connection or a device that's connected through a mobile network's a bit problematic. 90% of houses have an internet connection. This would just be wired permanent. It's not wireless. It will be wired into their internet connection. So, you know, part of that precondition of putting there would have to be an internet connection available.
Okay. So
Yeah, but I'm just wanting to make sure that we're understanding, because initially the way that you portrayed Christchurch was a reaction to being able to, because as we all know, some parts sunk a couple of meters. So it was a way around them managing sewerage in areas that pre-existed. So that would then explain why there'd be a rates rebate in terms of running electricity costs in affected areas. I mean, I just want to make clear that we're not entering into that discussion here.
No.
Where it's enabling a new build, enabling infill housing, enabling extra pressure on the system through new builds. It's not the same. It's not apples and apples.
I think, and if I go back to what I said before, there are different scenarios where this could be used. I think the only time you might look at that would be if we had an existing system which we did an upgrade on and required that upgrade to say, right, Mr. Hawes, we need to connect this to your power. And as a consequence, you're paying for something, that power, which you're also paying for in your rates. Therefore, there may be an argument to rebate that. For a new system, for a new development, I can't see any argument for a rates rebate, but it is for some of that, the option if we are retrofitting into existing areas for the benefit of the community or benefit of the project, we might look at that as an option.
Shane.
But just on that note, Nancy, does that even need to be built into a policy? Because that would be, you know, if the policy is around just installing these things, would we not look at that type of thing on a case-by-case scenario? Does it need to be built into a policy?
I think I will leave that to our policy.
I don't. Yeah. No. No, I agree. I don't think those are two separate things. So this is an inside a property boundary. Anthony, I think, is looking at perhaps we've got a big pipe network or an undercapacity pipe network. We can't afford to dig up a kilometre of street. We'll build a big detention system in the road reserve, but we need power to that pump rather than pay, you know, $2,000 a year just for a connection. We'll wire it to a single house and ask them to pay the power and we'll rebate them back. That's, yeah, probably a separate scenario.
Dave.
Yeah, sorry, I just had a quick search on the internet. I know they've got the low pressure system, sewer system. It also includes a grinder station, unfortunate name. Is that like a macerator?
That's the macerator pump. Yeah. It's a combination pump and macerator.
So combination pump and macerator going into a temporary holding tank that then gets sort of the topsoil or the top flow filtered outside.
Everything goes into the pump, into the chamber. Yeah. The macerator fires up and pumps to get it out of there into our network.
Right, and they've got a visible lid on top of this holding station.
An inspection lid.
An inspection lid that sometimes emits odours.
Oh.
Yeah, so I'm looking at that pump now. So you're going to have a lid there that is going to be accessible to the public or the landowner. Does that present a problem, a health and safety problem for things like kids and?
I live at Charleston. I've got a big septic system on our lawn. It's got a lid. They're not a 5-year-old's not going to open it.
So they're lockable and secure.
They are lockable, but they're very difficult to open as well. I don't think.
Okay.
On that, I think what you're talking about is you see the little green upside there. That'd be the end pipe. Because you don't want gases. and
Oh,
stuff
that's a
building up.
drinking pipe there.
But it shouldn't be, it's not you know, it's all wastewater, it's fast water and anything else, it's not,
Concentrate.
no.
Yeah, it's not, it's.
And
a
it's
combination of the grey and the black.
everything, it's not letting the water run off. So all you're left with is the solids. It's everything that stays there until it's empty. So the gas and build up and all the rest of it would be much less than a typical sewer system that goes straight out to a drainage field.
Yeah, gotcha.
Thanks, Brent. We've got just under 20 minutes left. How are we going for presentation? All good?
We're really through there. The only, we'll talk about other options, and I did briefly, mention it. You know, one of the constraints we do have is the Buller Bridge, the amount of, volume of, water we can get across the river. Upgrading that would give us as much improvement in the system, but you'd have to build another detention tank because our wastewater treatment plant can't deal with the volume going through it now anyway. So, you know, there are engineering solutions to the bigger problem, but they're going to be millions, not. You know, these are expensive systems at 17,000 per property, but scaling that up to something that would deal with that for the whole town would be unaffordable. Yeah.
Thanks.
So it's not, we're not trying to stifle development. We're just trying to find a way to allow development, but also signal that to people looking to do this, that it's not just a given that you'll be able to plug straight into our network.
Great.
But particularly given, as we pointed out, we can't charge a development levy on a single section that is being infilled. So it's a different proposition to someone subdividing up and saying, I want to put 10 houses here. The second a developer does that, they're up for development contribution. Now, development contributions allows us to assess the impact on our networks and charge to recover that impact. And it's a lot of situations doing that would absolutely stifle the development. So we scale back our ask. But it would be on a par with us around that sort of $20,000 per.
Cool. And
Yeah. So look, I'm hearing good things. If I were a developer, I would want to know if I'm looking at maybe doing some infill in Westport. Gee, you know, I've got someone who wants to do a bit of investment. So going back to my point about we obviously know where the issues occur. So there'll be something online available to a potential developer to say, if you infill here, this is going to be one of your likely additional.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We would have to determine that and make that available. I agree.
Okay. Dave Hingston. Thanks,
Yeah,
Dave.
thanks. That was partially answered the question. Thanks, Phil. The other part of the question was, is this going to apply potentially, and I don't know the areas that it is, but potentially to things like freedom camping sites that have sewage systems all hooked up, or caravan camping sites that link into some sort of mains contribution or drainage?
Good question. The only one I can think of that is connected would be Carter's Beach and Reefton at the stream. We're not talking about Reefton at this stage. The other freedom camping sites are at the North Beach. Neither of those are hooked into our wastewater systems here. Self-contained.
Caravan parks,
Yeah. Yes. We'd have to, I mean, if it's going to have an impact, we have to assess whether, you know, what that impact is and whether we can offset it or just allow it.
Okay. Thanks, Brent. We've got 10 minutes left.
Can I just ask a question? Is the answer yes, we want a policy? Do we want a policy to cover all of this? Because that's.
No, we can't.
Yes,
we
okay,
can't
so we
answer.
would.
You need to come back to us
We'd
with
come back
a
to you.
paper after.
So we would do that. So that if we did do that, the options that would be, the things that we'd be looking at in the policy, just so that you know what is potentially coming up, would be about use, in certain areas. It'll be about ownership, installation, those things that we've just talked about. That's what the policy would cover. Number of connections and an assessment criteria as well. So that's the sort of thing that a policy would cover if we bring that to you at the next council meeting.
Yeah, and you're going to come back with a recommendation and some options for us to consider. Yeah, Colin.
Thanks, Mayor. A little while ago, we were told there's a big backlog of policies that need to be renewed, reconsidered. So much so that in the proposed annual plan, we're going to bring in another person to help with the backlog. And now all of a sudden, I'm being hit with 2 today workshops on new policies. Now, why the urgency for these policies, please, Mr. Mayor? Because, as I said, we've got a hell of a backlog. No one's mentioned these before. We've just gone out for consultation and bingo. Like every other year that I've noticed, something always sneaks in after we go out for consultation. I'm concerned, Mr. Mayor, very concerned.
Thanks for your feedback, councillor. And I think, Brent's, as far as this is concerned anyway, explained pretty well in my mind anyway, why this needs to be done and how it's arisen. There will always be things from time to time, whether it be new technology or some constraint somewhere in the system that might be identified that needs to be dealt with. So I hear you, councillor. It's all part and parcel of getting better and better all of the time, but we can't certainly ignore things if we find that there's opportunity to, save money for the ratepayer and cover off risks that get identified. Would you like to add anything to that, Brent?
No, I think there's nothing Machiavellian in the process.
Okay, Shane.
And I've just got a question around it then, Brent, because these systems, where do they then sit with local water done well? Like they are waste water systems.
Yeah.
So are they assets that then transfer to local water done well?
So the ownership question would answer that. So if they're vested in council, they would be then transferred as an asset vested in council to the local water company. If they're private ownership, then it stays as it is.
Okay, so that, because that's important for us to make a decision on the ownership of them, I guess, going forward. Because what we don't want is costs of them blowing out of control because we don't have any control over it. So
yeah, I think picking up that's a really good point, because if we're going to this is going to move over to the new entity, we need to understand how that might look for the consumer.
No, great point. So whatever determination if we adopt a policy and this is how it is, how that policy and systems operate transfers to the entity. So there are already existing differences, I say, between the way each of the 3 councils deal with a lot of things, like Westland rates unilaterally for all water connections. It's a single rate. We rate by scheme. So those mechanisms are there for that entity to pick up and run. If we've determined this is how we operate, this is the cost we're willing to accept, or these are the costs the homeowner or property owner is imposed on through this policy, then that's what the local.
Yeah, I guess where I'm thinking at the moment is that, given the asset belongs to the council, at some point it transfers to a new entity. How do we protect those assets in terms of there may still be some charges that the households are actually incurring as well? I don't know the answer. I think maybe you understand where I'm coming from. It just needs to be thought through when the new water entity is operating. Are there any fish hooks that we should be thinking about at the moment that will perhaps dictate to us, or not dictate, but convince us that one option is better than the other from a ratepayer point of view? Did that cover that off, Shane?
yeah, like about the complications of it.
Okay, thanks, Phil.
Yeah, that you just raised a really interesting point, Mr. Mayor. Given that the new entity will be responsible for, wastewater, do we even need a policy? Wouldn't it be come under their mantle and they should be the one to develop that policy rather than us wasting our time for something that's only gonna last for 12 months?
Ideally, yes, but the entity's 18 months away. We know pressure is going to be starting to come on and Phil, and decisions being needed. Even if the entity was stood up, so 1st of July this year, it would take months for the three councils to have input, make decisions around what low pressure sewer is there a demand and growing.
If I can maybe add a little bit, I think if we do have a policy and set that policy goes with the assets to the new entity. I understand the other two councils don't have a policy. So it would actually potentially benefit us for setting how we want it to be done now. And Brent's right, the new entity is going to be faced with a lot of things, and this will not be at the top of their priority list. The advantage, and I challenged Brent on this the other day, why are we doing this now? Why aren't we waiting? But that demand factor, if we can put this in place now and give certainty to Buller developers, then that development can occur. If we wait another year or so, and then whatever time it takes the new entity to do it, then there is further delay and uncertainty around what developers are going to be faced with. So I think and that debate we had a few days ago convinced me that we actually did need to get this moving forward here.
Thanks, Anthony.
The question about what the entity takes over, they take over all the assets and all the liabilities. This is no different from any of the other assets or liabilities they would take over under those circumstances.
Okay, thanks for that. We've got Paul.
The previous council approved a separation of wastewater and stormwater. They identified 660 properties that they considered were cross-connected. 660 properties in town is quite a large percentage, and it's a huge amount of water after heavy rainfall. That system's underway to stop those cross connections. You take that volume out of the system, does the problem go away? Have you done any assessments as to the volumes?
It won't entirely go away because there'll always be groundwater seepage into old earthenware pipes. If you get a hole in a pipe or whatever, stormwater will always find a way through. But technically, yes, I'd be surprised if we don't reduce, 60+% of our stormwater inundation into our network. But it's not something we can do in a year or 2 years' time. This is, those gains aren't. We're going for the quick wins, but you've got things like gully traps that are flush with driveways, so the water running off the driveway goes straight to the gully trap, straight to a wastewater system. So they're small amounts, but they all add up, and they will take honestly years to get through. Those significant gains are a long way.
Brent, you did say, correct me if I'm wrong, that this is a policy, but the assessment will be done on a case by case basis, given
Absolutely.
the capacity. So if what Paul's saying frees up capacity in the system, you may decide that this doesn't need to be done, and the policy doesn't apply. Does that sound correct?
In 6 months' time, let's say the Rintole Street pump station was overflowing in a medium rainfall event, 5 times a year. If in 6 months' time we're going, actually, this hasn't overflowed at all. What's our capacity? What's our chamber levels and stuff look like? We can put another 5 houses feeding onto the Rintole Street pump station.
Yeah, so it's not a cut and dry policy. It's
and a lot of this development, this cross connection resolution, etc., they'll take time for us to understand what positive impacts are, because no 1 month or 6 month period is the same in terms of the amount of rainfall, etc. But we have trends. We know what 16 mil an hour does to Westport, and we know which pump stations get hammered.
Okay, thanks, Brent. Now,
It just concerned me that if, once the scheme's in to separate stormwater and wastewater, that some of the places have had to put these tanks in, suddenly they find they didn't need them, they don't need them anymore.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. We've got time for one more question from councillor Hawes, and then Brent, we need to wrap up. Thanks.
Just really, just from my perspective, it all becomes irrelevant in terms of transfer to, through the new water entity. If it's private at the boundary, up to the boundary remains with the landowner, then all we're talking about is nothing. Because from there on out, it's just normal. So I think that's, and clearly, my view on this is that, that if you're looking at user pays, the exacerbator pays, if you like, to the system. I'm wholly for private, paying privately and retaining private ownership.
Thank you, Dave. Okay, we'll wrap that up and give it back to Brent. Brent, does that give you a bit of a steer about what the feeling is?
It does, thank you very much. And Dave's quite right too, in that if we were the Westport of the 1950s with quarter acre sections, we wouldn't have this problem. Stormwater, you could spill it to your ground and your section would soak that water up. We're not in that. And we're approaching a situation where upwards of 70% of our land area is now hard surfaces, which just have to, stormwater's just streaming off properties now. So that's part of the solution.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Brent. Good presentation, and that's good information.
Thanks very much.
Okay, we're on time, which is good. Okay, so we'll just get organised here. The next workshop we've got, and public are involved, welcome to